Hello, and welcome to my second vlog on learning to be an LGV driver, or HGV, depends how old you are, I guess. The European Union have changed all of the names, and as I explained in my first vlog, that I was previously working in the Royal Air Force and then in banking for 25 years, and I've since got divorced, and I've decided to do something completely different. So I've taken a number of courses, so I'm doing a number of courses. One is plumbing, gas heating, with an old friend of mine who's been doing it for 30 odd years. And then I've decided to add a few extra strings to the bow, and I'm looking at taking what used to be called the Class 1 HGV, which is now the LGV C, Class C plus E. Now I'm learning this as I go, so I don't really know that much about it. I know quite a few drivers, and they're always helpful and ready to give advice. But anyway, I'm right at the beginning. I'm just going through the paperwork, to raise the paperwork to get a license. And of course the first thing that you've got to do is you've got to take the driver's medical, which I did at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. It cost £40, and it's not the sort of medical that I did expect it, because I read beforehand what was entailed. But the two things, when you get to my age, at least, is worried about blood pressure test and eyesight test. So the eyesight test, blood pressure's a bit high, so I'm going to take steps to do something about that. Like most people since the lockdown, towards the end of last summer until recently, there hasn't been a lot open or a lot to do. The weather's been particularly awful, so I've not really been out walking. So I've decided that I'm going to do 30 minutes a day of brisk walking to begin with, and then try and shed a few pounds. I was overweight. I'm 16 stone 12, fully clothed, so knock 5 pounds off. 16.5 stone. I'm normally 15, and I can never get below 14.5, even when I used to run every day. So I must be heavy boned or whatever. But even the nurse was very surprised, and she said that she would have guessed I was 14.5 before I stood on the scales. So I don't know whether she was trying to flatter me or what. But anyway. So the two parts, it's effectively a questionnaire, or 90% of it's a questionnaire, where they ask you, have you ever had a heart attack? Have you ever had a stroke? Have you ever had any treatment for heart disease? Any dementia? And effectively, most people in reasonable health, and I'm not saying I'm at the peak of fitness, have not had these kinds of things, although as you get into your 50s you've got to be more careful about these things. So I wasn't overly concerned about the questions that were being asked, but I was a little bit concerned about the eye test, for example. So I downloaded a chart, put it on the wall, and the last two lines are blurry. I don't wear glasses. Well, I do. I wear computer glasses, which we're kind of like, and I also wear reading glasses. So reading glasses, of course, focus around about where you would hold a book. So whatever that is, 10, 12 inches in front of you. And computer glasses are normally around about 75 centimeters, which is where I normally slouch. When I'm looking at a computer screen. So under normal circumstances, I don't wear glasses for driving. I don't need to, and beyond a few meters, my vision's clear, and I can't do anything about that because it's just an age-related thing. So I looked into laser surgery, and the optician effectively said you can't really do that in your case because with age the muscles are not as good as they used to be that control the lens. The lens is harder than it was, and so you get this deterioration over time. It happens to the best of us. So I started life with what we call 6/6 vision. I think the Americans refer to it as 20/20. And over time, got to mid-40s, late 46, 47, and I was starting to get further and further away from a computer screen to maintain focus. And somebody else noticed this, a colleague of mine. So I went for an eye test, and they said, "Yeah, I need to get some computer glasses and definitely reading glasses, because it was more and more difficult for me to read a book or whatever." So I was a little bit concerned about that. I needn't have been, because I took my computer glasses with me, which sharpens things up over 6 or 7 meters. I can see clearly from 2 meters, 3 meters and beyond. But at kind of the point where these charts are, the last couple of lines at the bottom start to get a little bit blurred. So I put the glasses on, and the doctor said cover one eye. You do one eye at a time, obviously, and then read through the letters, very, very clear, both eyes. And the doctor said, "Well, do you normally wear glasses for driving?" I said, "Well, no, I don't really, because I don't need to. I only wear them for reading or for computer work." So he said, "Well, I'll take them off and let's do the test." So I took them off and I read through exactly the same chart. And I didn't purposefully memorize the letters, but I knew what the letters were because I'd just done it twice. So without the glasses on, I could do the first 6, 7 lines, and then the last line, I just knew what they were. And that kind of makes you see them anyway. But I tried again, and the doctor was fine with that. And he said, "Yeah, well, you've got clear vision." And I can certainly, obviously, if I'm looking at something here or on the road in front, which is beyond the end of the bonnet, everything's clear. But you never know with these things, and the level of eyesight required for an HGV is quite rightly at a high level, at least in one eye. So there we are. Blood pressure a little bit high. Answered no to all of the questions because I've not had any of these difficulties, which are probably quite severe. I wouldn't want to drive if I was suffering from, or if I'd had 3 heart attacks or a stroke or whatever. These things are going to cause happen any time. So I've decided to do a little bit of fitness training, get the weight off that I've put on over the lockdown, and a good weight for me is about 15 stone. I can't get below that without severe exercise and diet. So that was that. So I'm still. He said everything was fine, so I'm expecting to pass the medical, and he will post that out to me in the next few days. So that was good. So it might lead to a few more vlogs on the topic of LGV training, starting of course with the Class C. In the meantime, I don't know whether you can do this, but I've started using the CD-ROMs that were given to me or lent to me to go through the theory. I don't think that's particularly difficult. I think the hazard perception is probably going to be the more difficult one, because in real life you see the hazards when you've been driving for 30 years. You can see the hazards as they're forming, and it's pretty much subconsciously. When it comes to doing a computer test of that, I've done a few, or I've been through a series of the video ones. I mean, apparently they use CGI now, but I've been through the video ones, and of course you can see many potential hazards. but they're looking for specific ones. So I guess that will just be practice. And I've noticed that a lot of people have been saying that the CGI versions that they use in the examination are a little bit more clear on where the hazard's building. Whereas I think with the the DVD ROMs that I've got, they've just plonked a camera on top of a car and then driven around that you get these hazards all the time. I mean, if anyone that's been driving knows that cars will cut you up, pull out, especially in London where I lived. Well, if you can get any speed up at all, they absolutely will cut you up. You have to be a little bit pushy as well to get onto a roundabout, or gyratory as they call these big ones in London. It's kind of it's a constructed scenario, so it's not quite the same as your normal driving and hazard perception during driving. But I think the idea is perhaps for people with lesser experience in terms of years of car driving, will give an insight into the kinds of things that they may not have seen. I mean, if you take a test in, I don't know, Aberdeen or in in the middle of Yorkshire, then you're obviously going to have a different experience to driving in and around the southeast and the London area. In fact, I've lived in central London for many years, and also in the outskirts in Essex, and I can say that the drivers in Essex are far worse than any that you meet in central London. So you kind of drive very defensively, but you've also got to be not aggressive. Well, I suppose it is aggressive. You can't hang around, otherwise you'll just block all the traffic. Nobody will let you out. So if you need to get onto a roundabout, you've got to be nimble. So anyway, so I'm pleased that that's out of the way. I haven't got the results yet, but I'm expecting from what the doctor said that I should have passed the medical. I've got all the forms filled out, ready to send off my car driving licence, which I've had for donkey's years, to get the provisional status stamped onto it, so that I can then start doing practical lessons, I should say. So in the meantime, I'm going to run through the theory. Now, I want to do the theory from scratch, but I want to learn it myself rather than do a course, and I don't know whether that's possible. It might be that you've got to do either an online course or by Zoom or in a classroom. I'm not sure about that yet, so I've asked that question, and I'm still waiting for a response, because I don't think there's a lot to the theory, and it's certainly, you've got to sit down and swat it, but it's not technically difficult, but there's a lot of knowledge that you need to acquire from it, from what I've seen so far. So I don't want to give the impression that it's a pushover. It isn't, but it's not. You don't need to be Einstein to pass it. And I think from what I've seen within it, most of the things I've seen so far is knowledge that you should have. And it's an odd thing to say, but in this country, you passed. I mean, I passed my driving test. I think I could fly before I could drive, so I think it was probably about 1985 or whatever. So it's a long time ago. And then that's it. You never have to return to it again. So you carry on. Well, I think until you're about 70. I think then you have to take an annual test or whatever it is. So you could go 30 years when the roads were less busy. New road signs come into being, new road markings, as I've found, come into being. Now, when you're driving a lot or on a daily basis, you tend to figure out what the road markings mean just by watching other people and obviously when you experience them for the first time, you wonder what the hell's this all about, and a lot of it's obvious as well. So, for example, with these smart motorways, everybody criticises them, but it's obvious that, you know, when there's a red cross, you shouldn't be in that lane, or if there's a speed limit on it, you obviously follow the speed limit, but you're never quite sure what it means, and you don't ever get any explanation of it. So as things change over time, there's no like refresher course required, thankfully. But then when you want to do something like this, you've got a whole different set of rules that are specifically related to LGVs. But also you get quite a good refresher on the highway code. So if you haven't looked at the highway code book for 30 odd years, you don't know what's changed, and there's no obligation to do that. Although it probably is a good thing to do. I'm pretty sure that nobody bothers, and certainly I didn't. But that's just the way it is in the UK. So it's actually interesting for me to read through. I flick through it because most of it's pretty obvious, but there are some things that have changed, or there's an explanation for what it is. I mean, you may have seen them on the roads, but you think, well, what's all that about? And they give you a good explanation of why, why they've introduced these new, road signs or road layouts, and of course it's the cheap way. The governments don't like spending money on this, even though we pay a fortune in tax, road tax. It's just a cheap way of keeping the traffic flowing. There's obviously a lot more cars on the road now than there ever used to be. I mean, I used to think that it was busy in the 1980s, but compared to today, everybody gets a car now before they're 18. Whereas in my day, my dad would say, right, I'm going into town at 10 o'clock. If you're ready, you're ready, come with me, otherwise you're on the bus. And I use public transport for a long time. I enjoy using public transport, especially these days when everything's busy. But I do like to I like to drive when I haven't got a specific destination, if you know what I mean. So if I'm going to, for example, Devon, I'll set off. It's a long journey. I'm going there for a holiday or whatever, and I love driving. If I'm commuting and I'm using the car just to get to somewhere to then do my job, then it's not quite the same. You're in a rush. It's stressful to get caught up in traffic, and so on, because it's a means to an end. So I hope that if you drove an LGV, it's your actual job. So if you're in traffic, of course, you don't want to be. There'll be time pressures, I guess, and so on. But that is the job, and you're getting paid to sit in traffic. So that's where I am. Hopefully in the next day or two I'll get the results, and then I've got all the forms pre-filled, put them all together with the license and send it off to DVLA, and then wait for the new license to come back, the photo card license. And in between now and then, apart from doing my day job, I shall be brushing up on the theory and the practicing the hazard perceptions and looking at the case studies ready for the CPC. One of the things I've noticed whilst I've been looking into LGV, and by that I mean Googling things, looking on the internet, speaking to friends who've done this, is that there's a lot of people complaining about drivers' pay. It's stagnated. A lot of that may well be to do with uncontrolled immigration or whatever it is. That's what a lot of people think it is. So what I'm going to do is, using my let's say skills from previous career, is look at is to model briefly, the costs involved in running a business that involves trucks. And there's plenty of information on the internet on the kinds of fees that are charged for haulage, the costs involved in different sizes of trucks, and so on. So I'm going to put that together on a spreadsheet, and then I'll perhaps in a vlog go through the economic model for running a haulage business, and then see where for my own interest is mostly to see where the driver's pay fits into the costs of ownership of an LGV, and the running costs, and all these things are available. They're averages, of course. They're available on the internet, and some people may I'll find it interesting just to see how these things pan out, and then where the driver fits in, why the pay is within a band, and how cost effective therefore that business is. So for example, if drivers earned £100,000 a year, it may well be, and it probably is, uneconomic to even bother, given the competition there is for the revenues. So I'll do a vlog on that certainly I'll be interested in, and maybe one or two others, because when you complain, and I do complain like the best of them, when you complain about things like salaries and so on, within a particular industry, it's useful to know what the constraints are. So it may well be that the owners of these companies are running inefficiently, so they will cut costs where they can cut costs, and they'll cut costs to the point where they can get away with it. So income is a supply and demand based business, and it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a big shortage of drivers. It's probably the case that there's a shortage of experienced drivers who have got a track record of delivery, not bumping into things, and so on. So if they aren't paying those people, if the businesses are not paying experienced people a decent wage, it may well be because they are under pressure to make profit. So for large firms with external investors who put the money up to buy everything, ensure the business runs, they've got to be to attract that investment, they've got to essentially be able to return some kind of dividend, which is the investment. So these are typically, if you don't do it yourself, which most people don't, but it typically carries out by pension funds and investment funds. So they will invest into a business, but they'll expect some kind of return. So I'm not going to model that because it's too complicated, but to look at the basic costs of running a lorry, of the running costs, the buying costs, which you then depreciate over time, and there is a limit to what they can charge in a competitive environment. So there'll be a lot of haulage firms vying for the same business and trying to undercut each other, and then eventually that finds its level. And I looked that up, and apparently it's £3 a mile for a 42-ton truck. So there's your revenue. So that's just the money that comes in when you get the business. On top of that, you've got fixed costs. You've bought a lorry; they're not cheap. And then you've got your running costs like tyres, repair and maintenance, fuel, and so on. You put all that together, and then you can get a rough idea. If you remove the costs of the driver, you can get an idea of what the company or even the owner driver has got to do before he breaks even. And then on top of that, you've got your driver costs, and then on top of and then you've got a profit margin. So I'll model that, and then it won't give a specific number, because you can't. There are certain things that you don't know. But different size firms will have different overheads. So if somebody's got like Eddie Stobart's have got thousands of trucks and trailers, they'll have huge head office overheads. But at the end of the day, and they'll have salespeople, administrators, planners, and so on. All their salaries come out as an overhead from what the driver's actually doing. So the driver's the revenue stream of the business, and then there are overheads above and beyond that. So the simplest scenario is an owner-driver. He knows he's got one truck, one trailer, if that. He does all of his own accountancy, invoicing, generating business through agencies or other means. And then you've got on the other end of the scale, you've got the large trucking haulage companies like WS, Eddie Stobart's, and Downton, and so on. So the bigger the firm, the more the overheads, but then they've got economies of scale. So for example, they might get cheaper diesel, they'll buy in bulk, distribute it themselves. They'll have their own workshops for repair and maintenance, cleaning, so on. But they've also got investors to satisfy. They've got to pay them, the chief executives and all the administrative staff and the salespeople, probably on commission, things like this. So that's your absorbed cost from the point guy who's bringing in the revenue, the driver, who's doing the actual work that generates the revenue into the firm. And of course, the driver is also an overhead. It's only a pretty important overhead, to say the least, but you can argue that the sales guys are the guys who are going out generating the business. If there's no business to be had, there's no drivers required. So all these things are taken into account. Now, I'm not suggesting that if I do that and it comes out and said, well, look, hold on, the range of pay is from £9 an hour to £20 an hour. At £20 an hour, maybe the company breaks even. At £9, they make a nice fat profit, and there'll be somewhere in between where you can see how reasonable that is. Now, I don't know what those numbers are going to be yet, because I haven't carried out the modelling, but it shouldn't take long to do, and you may well then be interested in where you actually sit within the whole business, and why different businesses will have different overheads, pay will be different, and the competitive environment in which haulage operates is obviously quite competitive, and so it's often the case was everybody roughly charges the same, and they get practically the same service, they roughly charge the same, and so therefore different types of company with different structures are going to be able to pay less or more. And unfortunately, that's the way of the world. We're not communist. There are no fixed salaries for anything. If you are in short supply, then the salaries will go up. If there are too many drivers, then obviously the salaries will go down. Or if they simply can't make the business work at a certain level of pay for drivers, then a lot of haulage firms will go out of business, and then it rebalances as the demand then is spread over fewer companies. So I'm interested in these things. I'm not suggesting that everybody is, but I might be able to just simplify it to give an idea of what and why the salaries within the industry and how they're calculated, and an insight into what those overheads really are. So if you work for example, if you work for a firm there's not too many people in the head office, too many administrators or paper shufflers as they're called, then they will absorb more and more of the cost base of the firm, and therefore something's got to give. And of course, if there's an oversupply of drivers, then the salaries will go down. If there's an undersupply of drivers, the salaries will necessarily go up to cover the oversupply. And then when that happens, other parts of the business may become less efficient. So in a way, the management of the haulage companies themselves are the ones who, if they can run an efficient business, they'll be able to pay better, reduce staff turnovers. Staff turnover is something that many drivers seem to be discussing online. And so it would be an interesting exercise just to see where that generally fits in with the economics of the business itself. Because everyone must realise that, you've got to realise that in any business there will be operational costs of which you've got no control over. So, for example, fuel. The cost of fuel is heavily taxed in this country. So that's an issue in the running costs. I suspect repair and maintenance will be an issue. Inefficient management of the company will be a big issue. And then balance that off with the competitive environment, i.e. how much money you can get for what you do. And that will be competitive, or it should be. And then what's left? How much profit do they want to make from the business? Obviously, you don't want to invest in something that doesn't return any profit, like a building society at the moment, for example. So I'll run through those things in a separate vlog. I'll make it short because it's quite a boring subject, and I think for most people anyway. What it will do though is it will just I can simplify it to the point where, look, these are the probable overheads, this is the range of salaries, that this is the effect on the profit margin, the bottom line, as business people tend to call it, and then see where the driver fits in. And there's two things that can come out of that. It explains the costs of the driver, the overhead cost of the driver, which of course is an essential part of the business, and also what the kind of the limits are. So there will come a point where unless the competitive environment changes so that you can charge more, if it's competitive, if you're charging £4 a mile and everybody else is charging £3, you're not going to get any business unless you've got some incredible reason for being able to charge more. And moving goods, I'm not sure what they are or what they would be. Given that constraints, there's obviously that's a constraint on drivers. Now, if there was a big union of drivers that said, no, we want a minimum wage of £20 an hour or £25 an hour, whatever it is, then the costs to the consumer or the buyer of the service will then go up, and they'll have no choice in the matter because it will be a fixed cost that businesses cannot get around. So there we are. Anyway, in a nutshell, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start learning the theory and the hazard perception and looking at the case studies and all of the CPC requirements. And then hopefully by the time I've got through that, I'll have a provisional license, assuming I pass the medical, which he gave the impression that I did. I'll have a provisional license and I can start booking in practical training, so get out on the roads. Okay, thank you.